failed to take the next step in her reasoning. If the fleet was not here for resources, why else could it be here? To make a point. To make a point by killing Jotun citizens. And while the Jotuns weren't at war with anyone right now, Jeltor had a pretty good idea who fit the criteria of both having a fleet and wanting to make an example of people. The Yennai Corporation had been unchallenged in this sector of space for years. They didn't really have a main industry. They just seemed to show up everywhere. They had their claws into many of the banks, even running a few. For a while, they had owned one of the largest munitions companies in any sector of known space. They traded in information, mercenaries, arms, drugs, slaves. That was until a human had taken their main base, killing both heirs to the company in the process. Barnabas had judged both Ulek and Ilya Yennai and sentenced them to death for their misdeeds. Koel Yennai, who had not been on the station, was still free. Now, no one could figure what the Yennai Corporation was up to. But Jeltor knew that anyone clever enough to build something so far-reaching in the first place had a plan, and he was very afraid that Koel had decided to make an example of Kuyopa. After all, the Jotun Navy had helped Barnabas find the Yennai base. A shadow passed overhead as their evacuation ship slid into place over the open water. Jeltor bobbed nervously in his tank, while long arms came down to start lifting tanks into the hold. Come on, come on, come on. Other shadows streaked overhead, casting everything into flickering darkness and light, and the distinctive whine of defensive ships sounded, as their engines primed for maneuverability in Kuyopa's atmosphere. Jeltor was telling himself that it was just a patrol, when one of the first missiles struck the water nearby. Helpless, Jeltor watched as the shock wave rippled toward them. He grabbed his elder daughter and shoved her suit behind his, and Lilac did the same with their younger. It was all they could do. When the shock wave reached the holding tank, the tank groaned and creaked, and a single crack spiderwebbed along the side of it. The shock wave continued past on both sides of the tank, and Jeltor felt a pang of relief and fear. They had survived one blast, but it was unlikely to be the last. The captain of the rescue ship must have reached the same conclusion. Heedless of protocol, the ship shuddered and began to rise into the air, tanks still hanging from the retractable arms. Unsecured in the tanks, some of them not even in protective suits, the Jotuns cried out. Their fear doubled when the ship rose high enough for everyone to see the battlefield. The Jotun Kuyopa Guard had scrambled every ship available to fight off the enemy, but their efforts were ineffectual. The carriers weren't descending. They, what must be destroyers, shot missiles from their position in orbit, while smaller ships darted down to harry the Jotun fighters and confuse the anti-missile tracking. As Jeltor watched, one of the anti-missile measures streaked into the blue sky and impacted a warhead of some kind. The passengers in the tank cheered, distracted from the fact that they were in an unprotected and swaying tank high above the ocean, and Jeltor didn't have the heart to tell anyone that what they had seen was a meaningless victory. Every system here was state-of-the-art, but Kuyopa was so small and unimportant that Jotun High Command had never put very much here in the way of defense. And now they were paying for it. The rescue ship banked, the tanks creaked, and Jeltor looked up as the ship's unsecured occupants screamed once again. The tanks were still retracting as fast as they could, but the arms weren't meant to hold them in mid-air while doing maneuvers. He counted the seconds as they came closer to the shadowed interior of the ship. The fighters created a barrier from the missiles and smaller Yennai ships for them. It had to be them, because who else would do this? But it was clear they could only hold on for so long. When the tank at last disappeared into the ship, Jeltor caught a last glimpse of a Jotun pilot spiraling out of control toward the water. Be safe, he thought. But he knew that pilot was not likely to survive either the impact or the ensuing explosion.